Hello, Esther, and welcome to this conversation today where we bring our differences around the table here on the World of Difference podcast. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
I'm so excited to be here.
Well, it's so awesome to meet you, and I'm so looking forward to this conversation because we have some event diagram of concentric circles that we intersect around, but sort of just right out the gate, something that's really big in my world right now and kind of all over the world people are reacting to, which is the election in Venezuela, where I grew up. We expected it to not be transparent, and it turns out it has not been. So, as we're recording this, the Carter Center and even the US, sort of officially, as well as other countries, have come out and said, we would love to see some transparency because it appears as though Maduro did not win, but he's claiming another victory. I'd love to hear your thoughts around what you've observed in Venezuela in the current election. And yeah, we would love to hear your perspective on all of it. So, what do you have to say about the Venezuelan elections?
Yeah. I mean, I'm going to take a different angle on it, not so much on the political side. I think for me, like my first reaction when I saw it was fearful of people losing their fire inside and like their aspirations. And I think like that's the lens, right, where I see the world. And I think that is the danger of not having transparency, right? Like if you don't have transparency and there's not that trust,
Mm.
then you start to think about any aspiration you have that you're like, well, there's no hope, right? So what's the point of coming together for collective action? Or what does that mean for my own goals and dreams that I had hoped for and I'm there? I don't even know anymore if it's possible or feasible. So I think like that
Mm.
was my first reaction is that for the people there, like what does that mean for them? But at the same time, I hope, I hope what this does is in some way awaken, right, other trailblazers, right, in the country or outside the country that, we can't keep allowing this to happen, right? Because I mean, I'm from Nicaragua, so similar.
Hmm.
I was born there and similar situation there. But I would say, it's also taking a look at history and going, but at first everyone decided to forget about what happened in the 80s. And in that case, they elected him at first. Now future elections are very similar to what's going on in Venezuela, but they elected, right? And so
Yeah.
because they was like, oh, well, we're just going to choose the lesser of the evil. But see, for me, that's giving up on your aspirations of collective power. And then I think like there was opportunity for other people to come, but those candidates didn't come together, and come together for collective power to fight against this. Instead, it was like a lot of the candidates all trying with their own agendas. And so for me, it was like a lesson too that we need to come together for shared mission and vision. And I really hope from this situation that it's not left just to one person to drive, right, this fight against these leaders, right, but that we come together as a collective to fight against leaders that are not transparent, that are filled with hate, or for one agendas that is not for the people. So I think for me, that's what I see is like, I hope, it's a terrible situation, but I
Yeah.
also reflects on us that we need to come together. We can't give up. We need to come together for collective action. We need to make a lot of noise. People who feel passionate about it just can't sit there and say, oh well, right? We need to come and fight against these things. And if we come together, it can't be like 10 people leading 10 different things, right? What is a win-win that we can all come together and fight against these type of oppressive, right, systems and movements, and also look back on how we got here and how do we now rebuild, right? So even looking like we all have individual responsibility in it as well. um yeah, so those were my thoughts that have come in through that, right? It's really about people coming together, and how do we do that more effectively to not lose hope.
Yeah, I love that perspective. I think that over time it's so easy to lose hope because this is not Venezuelans' first round with Maduro and then previously Chavez, where we would see people with their pots and pans in the streets, which is the Venezuelans' way of protesting. And this is a collectivist society that I was, very blessed to be raised in. I spent a little while in Costa Rica as a young child, so close to Nicaragua in the 80s, and there was a lot going on. Costa Rica was a very peaceful place to live as a little girl. I enjoyed a lot of freedom there and wonderful culture. But we were always aware that, very close to us, there were really hard things going on politically and for people who were suffering. But I think that the beauty of coming together is where we see some incredible things happen. I'm thinking about how in the United States right now, we have a bit of that going on. So what is your perspective around the announcement on a couple Sundays ago where Biden was going to step down? There was this nail biting 27 minutes of not knowing what was next. And then he endorsed Kamala. And then one by one, Democrats have put their support around her in ways that we didn't think were possible. What is your perspective on all of that?
Yeah, so my perspective on that, which I thought it was great that Biden stepped down. And the reason for being is because he listened to the people. So my perspective is all about listening to the collective, right? And then what they're asking for. Whether it's Democrat, Republican, whatever, it's not about the party. For me, it's about, have you listened to the people? And I think he really wanted to continue, but what I thought was really commendable is that, the people, and I remember like George Clooney went on TV, they asked him, please step down. Like, because we need you to step down so that we can collectively win. And I
Yeah.
think there was requests, and I think it took him a lot of strength to think about the greater good. And I think
Mm,
that was a lesson for all of us. That gave a lot of people hope. So I think it gave people that are Democrats hope that, oh my God, he stepped down for the greater good. Now this is a call to action. Great, I stepped down, but now you need to step up.
mm,
And I love that everyone came together and put in money, right? So people put in money
yeah.
behind, put whatever they could, either the volunteer time or money behind it. Because if this person is taking a step back, that's part of his own legacy, then okay, people who want this, I'm doing what you've asked, but I need you to now step into your power. And I think they have. So it's been really nice to see in the US, like, people coming around. I've seen, like, there's like Zoom calls, there's people sharing. There's more than I've ever seen in the past, but I think it's because it's about mirroring behaviors. And I think that's what I was trying to allude to even with the Venezuela thing. It's like we need to see that type of collective action. We need to see those type of sacrifices, because it's one thing to talk it, but it's
Hmm.
another thing to do it. And
Yes.
so since he did it, it allowed for other people to do it as well, right? He sacrificed, he thought about the collective. Now it's my turn to put my energy and also think about the collective. So I have really it's been really nice to see people come together. And for the first time I'm seeing in a long time, Democrats being aligned on a shared mission and vision. And I had not seen that for a while, right? I had seen, again, like, it was like, well, like, either trying to please everyone or, in the middle. And I feel like now it's like, no, this is our shared vision, and now we can all come around it. And so I think it's pretty beautiful to see, regardless of what the outcome is. I think it's just everyone is seeing the power of coming together under a unified cause.
Yeah. It's interesting because, one of the, excuse me, one of the narratives around the way in recent years, sort of the Republican Party here in the United States versus the Democratic Party have operated is, for example, especially with Trump, I would say increasingly with him, we've seen this very one side, one singular focus of elect this candidate, even single issue voters that have voted for him. Whereas on the Democrat side, it's sort of very diverse. There's a lot of opinions. The value is the diversity. And so the struggle has been how to have a singular candidate or a singular focus, So that's why those 27 minutes between Biden saying he wasn't going to run and before he endorsed Kamala Harris, which gave time for other people to jump in if they wanted to put themselves in there. Here in California, we could have had our governor, Gavin Newsom, say, hey, choose me. But instead, once he gave his endorsement to Kamala Harris, then it gave others the chance to say, are you going to endorse her too? Or are you going to run? Gavin Newsom apparently was on the treadmill when all this happened and his phone was blowing up because it was a Sunday. And then, soon gave his endorsement. The Obamas waited several days to give people that chance, all of that. So we saw it playing out. But it was a remarkable thing because one of the things we often hear about, what happens in our Congress or in when there's things happening to come up for votes is that often the Republicans have this narrow, singular, united strategy with a clear scapegoat and a clear enemy and a clear hero. And the Democrats show up with stuffed animals and they're all happy and love each other, but it's hard to know what the singular focus is. So it was truly remarkable to watch this group come together. And you are really, passionate about being united in a collectivist movement. And so how are you seeing that, sort of play out a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean it's exactly what you're saying. Like I that's what I loved about what's been happening, right? It's the collective coming together. And for me, collective action is what drives my whole and power drives everything what I do, right? So it's funny because some people have asked me, it's interesting the linkage, right? So in my background, I was first I was trained as an environmental scientist and I was a diplomat. And like so the career doesn't matter. My how to is the same. Like I help people unpack like what's their vision, what's their why, and then come together and bring their superpower together to a group and then create that shared mission vision for collective action, right? But part of that work is that you have to first discover what is it for you, right? You can't come join a collective action unless you're clear on what
Mm,
your why is, what's your vision, and how you fit into that, right? So, but at first it's confusing for folks because I always worked on the collective, right? And then when I transitioned, I realized in working with the collective is that a lot of that resistance that I was facing from folks of like, well, you're asking me to value people beyond title when title has been the only thing I've been validated for my whole life and things like that. I'm like, well, I'm asking you to listen first. But if they haven't done the exercise to listen to themselves, they don't even know what that entails. So like I
mm,
transitioned a lot of my work to work with individuals. And at first, because I was like, you know what? I realized that only 20% of people know what their purpose and their why is. And so I'm like,
mm,
of course we can't come together for collective action when there's so much lack of clarity sitting in the individual. So they don't it's hard to go into a cause or not also get into the trap of just going after a singular issue because they haven't done that work to think about themselves holistically. So when I transitioned to a lot of this like work on, I wrote a book, a workbook, and put everything out there, like that I've been working with groups and to really so people can unpack what that is for them. Because
mm,
I know that when people, I've seen that when people know and clear what their superpowers, what they know what to bring to the table, all that toxicity leaves. Like that whole
mm.
thing of competing with one another out the door because you're no longer looking for other people to give you direction. You know your direction. You
Yeah.
know your value add to a table, right? So you're no longer trying to bring your colleague down. You're no longer competing anymore, right? Because you know exactly where you fit in, the value you bring, what is important to you, what do you value, what you want to fight for, what you want to bring to this world. So instead, you're more willing to look at your person next to you and ask, hey, how can I support you? Tell me about your stuff. I'll tell you about my stuff and we together. Because that's what I saw when I was even working on big issues of climate change. I'm like, we can't even come together and agree because no one doesn't have that alignment inside. So
Mm,
I love that this is moving towards that like type of thing. Like people are at least coming together saying, I know that having democracy and transparency is important to me. So that's why I want to join this, this Democrat movement, right? And like you said, like even like as you mentioned, you were talking, right? Democrats, really diversity. And I think that the candidate represents that too, right? So it represents even the values. Um, but I think that that's where it all connects for me. And so my thing is like, I hope though this opens the door, right? As whatever comes out of this process is that people realize, one, that they do have power, like even them supporting, look at how it's changed things, right? And
Mm.
then being like, hey, we're, what is important to me, and like what how can I contribute more, right? And like realizing that they can continue to be part of the change and be and make the world better. It doesn't have to be like you said, like this whole thing, like filtered in hate, filtered in competition, or there's not enough space for all of us, which is a lot of the narrative sometimes of like, of different
Hmm.
groups and parties. There
Yeah.
is space for all of us to coexist. There is space for all of us to bring value, whether you're at work, whether you're in society, whether you're in business, right? And it's more about,
Yeah.
if we come together, when we come together and bring in our different superpowers, it's actually, that's where we can make amazing change. And I've seen it personally in communities when they've come
Yeah.
together. I've seen a community here and I've seen a community right now I'm in the DR, in the Dominican
Uh-huh.
Republic, in the border DR and Haiti. I proved that approach works. And so, we went from like, funding of 700,000 to 100 million, but using that approach, like, this is why they need. Let's give money to what they need. And then when they own it, it's part of their purpose, it's part of their shared vision and mission. Even after that funding ended, they have taken it. They've soared with it. Every single vision they've continued to build. It's self-owned. It's something that they're proud of, passionate about. They fight for it. And they continue to shape that vision. And so I've
Mm.
seen when people actually come together, when they're clear about what they bring, they come together for this. And there's, of course, there's all these different groups there that coexist, but they're united under that. It's
Mm.
amazing. And so, but I've also seen the opposite. When you're not clear,
Yeah.
when you haven't taken that time, how toxicity can boil, and how you can create the exact opposite, and
Oh,
push
yeah.
everyone out,
Hmm.
and all those opportunities and everything is out the window. Yeah.
Oh, 100%, 100%. I really would love to hear your perspective on this as a Latina immigrant. You alluded to this sort of scarcity mentality notion that there's not enough room for everyone. We're seeing a lot of rhetoric from the Republican National Convention when that was going on until now around, this alleged, you know, mass entrance from our southern border into the United States of people who we're hearing so many wild things being said about that, such as they're taking people's houses, they're taking people's jobs, as if jobs in the US only belong to certain people. Or, so many narratives we could unpack around that are false. But as somebody who did come with hope, um, and I do not ever assume that all Latinas are a monolith. Not even all Venezuelans are the same. Some of the best people I know are Venezuelans, and there's some real turkeys out there, just like white North Americans can be. So we have Latinos voting for Trump, we have Latinos supporting Kamala Harris, we have everything in between. But as somebody who has an immigrant story, how does that narrative land with you, this whole scarcity mentality that we're hearing?
Yeah, that's a good question. And to me, again, it's all related, right? Like I really push against those scarcity mentalities, because one thing is that it shows up in politics, right? And I think that's why that inner work is so important, because then they it's like in politics, they feed on the scarcity that exists within you. So if you haven't done that work, right, you live in that constant fear-based mentality. So you're gonna hang on to it. So that fear of they're coming to take over, oh, the violence, the this, or they're gonna rape our kids, and I see a lot of that actually in the Dominican Republic and Haiti as well. You see that a lot
Hmm.
in Costa Rica and Nicaragua. You see that right now with the Israel-Palestine conflict, right? You see that a lot in all different borders. Um, and it's the same narrative, right? But it's feeding on that fear and that exactly what you're saying, that scarcity, that they're taking something that's yours. But the thing is that that's all rooted in all scarcity. So right, so like if you're someone who believes in abundance, you are not going to stick on to that narrative because you know that's not true. You know, as if like I put all engineers in a room and I'll be like, even though you're all engineers, you all bring something different to the table, and we need all of you. Same with teachers, same with scientists, right? Same with anything, right? And so that same mentality, if you have it, you're going to be toxic at work. If
Yeah.
you're going to be toxic with your family, competing with your siblings or your cousins, right? And so it transcends. So if you have that scarcity mentality, you don't believe there's space. So then you're just like, okay, well, then they're trying to take something of mine, then I just need to push them out rather than see it as an opportunity, right? Like, actually, different perspectives will come. Actually, this will enhance our economy. This will bring everyone together, and like you said, in my experience as an immigrant, I experienced enormous discrimination, and
Mm.
sometimes, and I get mixed reactions from that, like from people. So some people will say, but really, your skin's a little fair. I'm like, well, to you, but then to someone else, I look very, very Latina and I have a Miami accent. It's about perspective, but it's still on paper. Especially in the diplomatic service, this 1.8% Latino. I didn't look like the typical diplomat, right? And they
Yeah.
were also expecting a white male. And so
Yeah.
at work or representing the country at high events or even like things like that, they were not expecting me. And there's also an ageism thing that I would experience, right? I look younger.
Mm.
Um, and I think though, but with that again, it's like these stereotypes of who I think you need to fit and in what box and what role you should play, right? And so it's all playing on those narratives of one that all immigrants are also uneducated or all violent or all these things, right? And instead of looking at individuals as all of us bring some value to the table, and how can we enhance that, and as a country, and like realizing that we don't have there is no scarcity in the United States. There's tons of land, there's tons of towns that actually need to be rejuvenated and populated. Imagine instead if we came together as a collective and really thought about, hey, we could really rejuvenate some towns, right? Some towns that have been forgotten and deserted. Why don't we intentionally think about, we know immigration's happening. Why don't we intentionally think about maybe we can, put more populations in certain towns, rejuvenate those cities that are struggling right now with opioid, the drug abuse and all sorts of things
Yeah.
because there's lack of opportunity. There's so many ways to come together to creatively think about it instead of just immediately shutting out. But the thing is, in reality, though, that's why I'm so into the individual conversations, because the thing is, those narratives start at home. Like, I think about when
Mm.
you come home and you talk about your dreams and aspirations, well, a lot of times the reaction is that's unrealistic. You need to put your feet, you need to, in Spanish, aplanteate, it's like ground yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, that's not for you, right? So if we're doing that at home, right, we're already promoting scarcity mindset, or in
Mm.
Thanksgiving and Christmas, telling people, asking them about their weight rather than their aspirations. We're already we're fostering those type of mindsets, right? We're already creating scarcity from when they're from at a child. So how can we not expect that when they're adults for them not to be on fear? Like, I even see it when people want to pivot careers. They're like, oh, I was there already for 10, 20 years, or want to leave a relationship. They're like, but I already invested this time. But that's also because society is like, there's not a lot out there. You need
Yeah.
to be just grateful for what you have. Everyone is struggling, right? That's the narrative we see in the news and society, rather than being like, you can pivot to whatever you want. All you need is a plan. Let's think about how we can transition there, who you need to know, what you can learn, what you can do, right? And that's what I help people with. But just that switch is so different what we've been ingrained our whole life. So for me, it's all tied, because that would not take, like, people would not take to that narrative if they didn't have that scarcity mindset in them that's been given to them since they were a child. If
Mm.
they were living in abundance, like I look at that narrative now that I am someone who lives in abundance, and I'm like, that is so not true. You know what I mean? Like
Right.
even the narrative of they're taking our jobs. I'm like, are you no, like
No, they're
let's
not.
it's not even possible, right? Like even like let's not
Right.
even think about political affiliation. I'm just like, no, why are you being so limiting? Right?
Right.
Or that all people are the certain way. You would not think about that in abundance mindset, right? But the
Mhm.
issue is I see is that if until we really address those that larger systemic issue, we're going to see that not just in politics, but we see that in the workforce. We see that in our families. That's why you have so many people with depression, anxiety, all these things. It's a ripple effect, right? Or
Yeah.
even in the countries. And I also talk about the reverse too, like because like I spent a lot of time here in the Dominican Republic. I talk to a lot of youth, and a lot of them are like, I want to go to the US, I want to go to the US. And I have to stop and tell them, there's nothing magical. Like this is the thing, like with civil wars and everything, I'm super thankful that I had the opportunity at that time because there was nothing. But in
Mhm.
countries where you're not in that dire conflict point, right? What is stopping you from building that life where you are? Like there's nothing magical that when you move, you still have to do that inner work of like what's stopping you from doing that here. And then later if it's about scale and you want to try different places, great. But there's nothing magical like about moving somewhere. I see a lot in also relationships where like I just need to run away to another place. There's nothing you can't avoid the inner work of like what is holding you back now from
Mhm.
creating and taking that opportunity or building what you have to build, because you can build anything anywhere. It's just, but what is it that's holding you back? And so that you're also, when you're immigrating, that you're immigrating for the right reasons, right? Like, I mean, for fleeing, of course, that's a totally different thing, and
Yeah.
for asylum. But there are cases where it's like for economic opportunity, it's to stop and think, like really, really put that in your assessment. And if it still is like, yes, for there's more opportunity for me for different markets and this, fine, right? But it's actually taking that next step rather than just saying, I just see shiny object syndrome, so I want to go there, right? It's really
Mm.
being deliberate in your actions, right? And in your decisions. And that can happen on a macro scale from country to country. It can happen on a micro scale, right? From city to city.
Absolutely.
But
Yeah.
it's those questions to ask yourself, right? It's yeah.
Good questions. Yeah, absolutely good questions because we do see I mean, one of our number one asylum seeker, demographically here in the US would be Venezuelans, and absolutely there's such a case for that, right? And they walk through all the way to get here. My family lives on the southern border in New Mexico, and my mom does a lot of work on the border. She was director of border health under the Obama administration and early under the Trump administration, but he defunded all that to build the wall. It's just wild, but that's a whole other conversation. But my family is very involved in helping receive the Venezuelans that come across. So much trauma. The fact that they survive it at all is just a miracle, and they come with sexual assault like by far the majority of what they walk. It's hard. And so we know that by the time people get here, they have really worked and they have to want it, and it has to really be a desperate reason to come. And then when they come, they face this rhetoric and
Exactly.
making them look like people who are nefarious in some way. So I mean, I know that when you immigrated, your family did, it was a whole different United States at the time, but some of this stuff was still there. I'd love to know a little more about your story of your family coming here, why you came, and what that experience was like for you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's still very similar in the sense like there's still that anti-immigration immigrant even then. So at that time, I mean, my story is that it's interesting. So like when I was 2, I almost died. I was given 3 weeks to live. I had a health problem and with my urethra. And actually, at that time, they had gone to the neighboring countries like Costa Rica, Honduras. There wasn't a lot of clarity about my condition. And they recommended that in Miami, probably, there could be doctors that could, medicine in the United States is pretty, and I also in Jamaica actually, but it's pretty advanced, and they have some, so they knew that probably there I could have a solution. But my parents don't have that money and that funding to do that medical care. I mean, and that's a whole other topic too about even access to medical, right? Worldwide, like again, pain point. But
Mhm.
so money was an issue. So, but my dad, he's not religious, but he's spiritual. He said, I want to play the lottery. So they played the lottery and they won. And then my mom and me traveled to the US, and then I was able to save my life. So that is that started what my life would be, right? So I was given this, you could say, a miracle, and my life was saved due to treatment. But I mean, I was very lucky because I mean that was such a crazy series of events that I got access to medical care that a lot of people don't, right? And I got my life to be saved. But then when we came back, right, the country was in war. And I think that's where, that's a lot of what's happening, right, in all these different countries, right? Even like I said, in the Middle East and in Latin America, right, in different parts in Africa, right? It's just your country. That's it. Like the currency's devalued, everything you had built, right? You have to start over. And that's why for me, I work with a lot of people and really unpacking their how to, because I stay with that mentality of my identity is not my job or my title. Because who's to say that the United States later just doesn't happen to? We don't know. We can go into a civil war, nuclear war, climate change, but my how to no one can take away from me. And I can bring that to any situation. And that's like the immigrant mentality, right? Like they knew they had to leave. They had to leave everything behind. And then I lived with guilt because all the money I always thought about, if I wasn't born, they could have used that money and they would have
Mhm.
came and immigrated to the United States with money, which is very different than immigrating to the United States with no money.
Yeah.
And because even though my parents were educated, they had to start from the bottom, right? And I think also we always talk about this narrative, which I also fight against, is the self-made narrative, and you just have to put your head down and work hard. But let's be truthful. Let's talk about transparency. That is
Mhm.
not true.
Right.
How you move up the ladder and how you have success is through collective power and networks.
Mhm.
And when you're an immigrant, you don't have that. And so, even if you're educated and you can work as hard as you want, you don't do that step, you don't climb up the social economic ladder. And so part of the stuff that I talk about with students is you got to make a network. This is not like you do not, you got to fight those limiting beliefs and those limiting narratives that it's like you and échale ganas and you're going to do it. No,
Right.
like that next step is by you networking, you meeting people, you getting to circles, you hustling it. And even I've had family come from Nicaragua. I'm like, you got to go to different groups, church groups, community groups, whatever that is, and tell them your skills and do that. It's not going to be sending your resume to 500 places, but that's something that we don't transparently talk about
We
because
don't.
it's part of that same narrative, right? It's we want to talk about the accolade, but we don't really want to be truthful on what that really takes. And I don't
Yep.
think, and I'm still trying to understand, there's nothing wrong with saying that it requires collective power networks. It doesn't take away from anyone's merit. So that was the lesson. I mean, I learned growing up, since they didn't have those networks, right? They had to work, paycheck to paycheck, all these different jobs, and I never got to see them live out their true purpose and potential. And even though later, once I became an adult, I was able to help my dad fulfill some of his legacies, and my mom, but it's they missed out on their core years again from not knowing how to navigate the system or create that for themselves there. So I think my experience was that, like, working, like, okay, stressed on money, paycheck, and then they wanted to us to live in a neighborhood with good schools, but then that meant we were one of the few Latino families, right? And
Yeah.
so even though we were paycheck to paycheck, they would do the long commute so that we could go to a good school. But then we would experience all types of discrimination. And for me, I almost didn't pass kindergarten, so they forced my parents to be English only with me at home,
Wow.
where I had to only speak in English to pass and forget about my Spanish. But then that ended up hurting me when I was 10, because then we ended up moving to Miami to be closer to family, to have so they could have somewhat more opportunities because they had some sort of network there rather than just, service jobs, right?
Yeah.
And there I had to relearn Spanish, right? And but that's great. It's one of those things that I also fight openly against. Like, instead of helping transition um the child to be bilingual, right? Like, it's because at the end of the day, I'm still Latina. I have to be able to communicate well in both languages. So it took me a long time to catch up again, just for the interest of me, assimilating, learning English. But the discrimination is real. Even every single accolade I made, and I was I became then the people pleaser, perfectionist, overthinker, right, to help my family, right. The financial security was a big pain point, and
Yeah.
I wanted to get my family out of it. So I learned, how do I navigate the system, right? And first I was like, well, I'll do well in school, and then I'll go to the top schools. But even then, I went to top schools and I didn't network as I should have, because I didn't know that was part of the formula, right?
Yeah.
I just worked hard, and I learned that later in life. But I wish I could go back, right? And taken more time to develop those things, because I had to develop them later. So that's why I like to spread that message to folks now. That is a key. And even though I climbed the whole ladder, every single time I had an accolade, it was told to me, oh, you're probably got that because of that program that's helping folks. Or, oh, really? You got there? Oh, I'm sure it's because of this, right? Like, no, it's actually my own merit. You know what I mean? And
Yeah.
even so, those programs do help. Those programs just, those programs are necessary so that you were willing to look at my name, even because I had the same merit, but you wouldn't even consider me if it wasn't for those programs. So yes, I'm super thankful for those programs like affirmative action, but because you wouldn't have even seen my talent if it wasn't for that. But I'm at par with everyone else here. If not, how could I graduate with everyone else? I have the same test scores as everyone else, right? You need those
Yeah.
programs to even just be willing to give slots. But even like in
Yeah.
the workforce, having a seat at the table, it was, oh, that. And I fought a lot of narratives in my life. Like, I think also some mentors and things would tell me, because of all that discrimination, they would tell me, oh, you have to be really hard, Esther. You have to be like a B word and this and that. That's the only way. And I used to fight that and say, no, I don't.
Yeah.
Because I don't need to be that person to be given respect and to fulfill the impact. But it's hard, because
Yeah.
since you're experiencing all those things, the default is to say, I need to be stiff, hard, so that no one hurts me and penetrates me. And
Yeah.
I like to fight that and say, I'm going to be who I am. And yes, that means that, I do open myself up for these more things. But if we don't do that, what kind of example are we giving to the future generations? We need to model behaviors. We need to show that it's possible to be authentic. It's possible to be kind and still be able to be present in these spaces, have be able to be part of these spaces, and that we're welcome, and that we can be there, right?
Yeah. 100%. We're seeing this play out in the political stage right now, where people are calling Kamala Harris a DEI hire, which she's not being hired, first of all. But also, it just shows that, I don't know, you mentioned there's been these Zoom calls. I've been in the White Women for Harris Zoom call, and then the Women for Harris Zoom call after that. But while I was in the Women for Harris Zoom call, my husband and our 20-year-old, who's excited to be able to vote for Kamala Harris for his first election, I'm like, wow, you're so privileged. You get to vote for a woman the first time. But I was overhearing Sean Austin, who's this famous actor who played Samwise Gamgee in The Lord of the Rings. And he was talking about his daughters and why he's excited for Harris, and, unpacking some of these narratives that we're hearing, which is that they're calling her a DEI hire because the assumption is that's a white male position. Because he's like, did you ever put the placemat out in front of your daughters when they ate and it's got all the presidents on it? Well, why are all 46 presidents men, with the exception of one black man? And so when you say, well, everybody had the same opportunity, well, it's just very interesting that when we gave everybody the opportunity, we only ever chose white men. And if you can't say that out of 45 plus times something was wrong with our bias, our narrative, that you need programs, you need awareness for people to learn to check our assumptions of who can lead. And so you having been in, government and diplomacy, and they're shocked that it's a Latina young woman. Like, wait, in my mind, I thought a white man from the age range of 50 to 70 was going to show up, right? And so if we
Yeah.
can't own the fact that we expect that in leadership roles, whether it's business, diplomacy, government, education, then we're not being honest. And so I think all the things you're saying are true. Networking is huge. And yet you've written about this. You've even written a workbook. So I'd love to know a little bit more about your book and how it relates to all this, creating your limitless life on your terms. It's been very well received. What inspired you, and what can people expect when they read it?
Yeah. So for a couple of so there's a lot of reasons why I wrote the book, but the book is part memoir and part how to. So it's probably it's heavy on the memoir side, which is why I have the workbook as well to do the exercises. But the thing is that there was not a lot of books written by diverse authors, right? I think the percentage of authors that are diverse is very low. And so the thing is that you can't beat what you can't see. And so it was really important for me, and it was really hard to write my full memoir for a couple of reasons. One, risk of professional reputation, and second was hurting my family. And one of the things that I think I faced enormously, and I talk about this in the book, is hyper scrutiny. So it's multiple levels. So as a high achiever, you are basically congratulated for all your accolades, but you're also extremely hyper scrutinized. So even as you mentioned in selection, right? It's any success, it comes with the hyper scrutiny of, oh, she must have gotten it for this or for that. Or if you make a mistake, it's 3,000 times more amplified than if the
Yep.
other person, right,
Yep.
made a mistake. That's who that is the person they expect, right? They
Right.
want, it's like psychology. You want to um prove your assumption is right, or what you know.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll find any way to prove it and find any mistake. So you're on a microscope. But then
Yeah.
what that does, though, is that then you, because of all that beating, it's really hard to be authentic and vulnerable.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the work I had to do was releasing that and sharing all of that I went through, and being authentic and vulnerable, and showing the duality that you're loved and hated on the same day, and how hard it is to be in that position and to be the trailblazer, to be like the
Mm.
first in your circle to do something, to be the one that is, it's the token to do all these things and to fight these causes. It comes at a huge cost that no one talks about. And so it's a lot of the
Yep.
reactions and the well receivement I've gotten has been, wow, you actually said that's what you actually talked about that. This is all things I do, but I would never have the guts to share.
Yeah.
But that's important, because I think we share so much about, again, put your head down, work hard, and then all of a sudden it magically happens. No, there's an up and down. So it's really important to have that resilience. And so a lot of my power framework I have there is, you need to know your why. You
Mm.
need to enjoy it along the way. You have to have that work-life integration when you're fighting these things. You need to have that, the vision always of like what you want, and then the resilience, like knowing what you've overcome and how it's helped you, and integrate that in your everyday. Because when you're trailblazing, and whatever that is, that those toolkits you got, if you don't integrate in your everyday, that's when you're going up and down, right? And
Mm.
that's when you see on TV, when you see so many people and you're like, but that person was so successful, but they took their life. It's a lot about that resilience, because they all experience it. And we see that with celebrities, we see that with activists, right? We see that as really lonely. So, and my book really centers on that immigrant experience too. Like I share even with myself how I wanted to be in certain circles, so I would hide that I was suffering economically. Like I would skip lunch in high school because I had reduced lunch in the cafeteria, but the people I needed in the circles did not eat there. So I would just skip lunch, right? And it's not a matter that I couldn't have lunch, but there were choices I had to make. And I think people are not aware that people are making those choices every day, right? So it's even having empathy for folks, that you don't know what people are going through every day. And so I even have empathy for folks that even say those comments. I've had naysayers even in my movement that have later come around as champions, because sometimes they are also dealing with all that scarcity mindset and all those narratives they were told. But as you stay in it, you're consistent with your messaging, right? You can change folks. We're not one side or the other, right? We are gray. We're constantly evolving. And so you can change someone that may have had those stereotypes and that ickiness at first, and then as you've been consistent fighting, they're like, huh, maybe I was wrong. Let me come around. Maybe I can do that, right? And I've had people that. So I think it's also, I've even when those comments come, I say that person's just not there yet in their journey, but maybe they will be
Yeah.
later. And
Mm,
so it's really
that's
shifting
good.
that from yourself, and that's what I think. I think as people, that whole narrative, even that we see in politics, and that I'm just like, well, maybe with time, if we can move people from that scarcity and abundance, they can change their mind. They can change their perspective. I mean, I have changed people's perspective. There was a summer I worked in Costa Rica and I was in Nicaragua. And I worked with these folks that had very strong opinions towards Nicaraguans. But since I didn't look like their traditional one, they
Mm,
would accept me, and I would say, but I am them. I look like them, just from a different region. I think you're just assuming. And over time they
yeah.
were like, I was completely wrong. And that's
Mm,
and that's okay. And that's
yep.
part of healing. That's part of growing. That's part of evolving. And I've seen that in conflict mitigation groups as well. And I mean, that's a great part about coming together and being open to accept someone later, right? It's not, I don't know. I don't like to see things as like, right? That's what we want. We want people to be able to come together and have more empathy. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your differences and helping us know how to make a difference together from your perspective today. How can people find you and more of your writing?
Yeah, people can find me on Be Act Change on Instagram, b.act.change, right? Be yourself, right? Do the action to align your life, right? And then change. We can all change the world. Yeah, so my book, Creating Your Limitless Life, and I have Chasing the American Dream crossed out, because it should be whatever your dream is, not metrics, not getting married by 30, not, all these metrics we create in society. You can create your own metrics, right? And then the workbook is where it's the Creating Your Limitless Life workbook, and that workbook is my full coaching program. For me, access is really important. I spend my whole youth in the library, and so my thing is I want everybody to have the resources. So it's 99 cents on Kindle, both versions, book and workbook. Everything's there: how to discover your purpose, how to unpack your legacy, find that alignment, goal setting, create that resilience. So the workbook can function solely on its own, separate from the book, but the book gives you that context of the story about how it applies, right? To not just myself. I have case studies in there, and then the workbook is like the really on how you can do it yourself. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, everybody go find that. We'll link it in the show notes. Thank you so much for being on today and sharing your story with us.
Thank you, Lori. Thanks, listeners.